Now, Access Infra Africa, a pan-African developer, owner and operator of power assets, has signed a joint development agreement with Quaint Global Energy Solutions to invest in the $100 million ABIBA solar project, a 50-megawatt solar power plant being developed in Kaduna State in northern Nigeria. Well, CNBC Africa's Esther Ubodaga spoke to Vahid Fotuhi, Director of Origination at Access Power, to get more insight on this landmark project. Take a look.
Thank you, Vahid, for taking the time out to join us. Now, Access Infra Africa is investing in a $100 million ABIBA project in Kaduna State here in Nigeria. Tell us more about this investment and why you're investing in it.
Thank you. Access Power is the largest privately funded developer, owner, and operator of renewable energy projects across Africa. Currently, we have renewable energy projects under development in 17 African countries. Earlier this year, we launched the Access Co-Development Facility, ACF, which is essentially a competition aimed at identifying early stage projects that have a strong foundation and providing them with the resources and the support they need to make their projects bankable and to bring them towards financial close. And this was the inaugural year of this competition, and we had applicants from 18 different countries and 55 different entries as a whole. And one of the winners of this year's competition was indeed the ABIBA solar power project. And what we feel the potential is that this project has the opportunity and the foundation to truly transform the Nigerian solar market and to serve as a catalyst for future investment in this highly promising sector.
Now let's talk about the impact, the expected impact of this investment of this project. 600,000 homes in Kaduna, households are expected to have power in the daytime. Tell us more about that.
Indeed, the beauty of this plant is that once it is built, it will be very, very simple and inexpensive to operate and maintain. As long as the sun keeps shining, this power plant will keep producing clean, reliable electricity. And as you mentioned, the power coming out of the solar power plant will be enough to satisfy the daytime consumption of over 600,000 new households.
So tell us about similar projects of this kind that you've done perhaps in 2016 or recently.
Yes. Well, currently we are developing 3 projects of a similar scale in Egypt, as well as projects, solar large-scale utility projects in Kenya, in Uganda, in Mali, and several other African countries.
Now we know that electricity, or rather off-grid electricity, is a challenge for many African countries, and there are actually quite a number of companies, some entrepreneurs willing to fill this gap. Now, but capital, both debt and equity, is a problem, and we understand that traditional models of energy financing don't particularly work for off-grid projects. What is your perspective on this?
Indeed, the power sector has many different subsectors, each with their own nuances. The off-grid sector, as we have seen in other markets in Africa, can develop through distributed generation and financing schemes that are geared towards end users with credit provided to residences and commercial users of electricity. Now, the utility scale power sector caters to a whole different type of requirements, and as a result, we've seen financing tools that are being developed by international banks, commercial banks, and IFIs, which make these investments possible today, whereas 12 or 18 months ago, these projects would not have been financeable.
Okay, now talk us through, in your opinion, how African countries should begin to scale up on renewable energy.
Okay. The beauty of renewable energy is that the fuel is free and the infrastructure needed to supply that fuel is non-existent. Currently, Nigeria relies on fossil fuel for 85% of its power generation. What that means is that if ever there is any ruptures to any of these fuel pipelines, then the whole generation structure falls apart. And conversely, with wind and especially solar, you're able to build up very low cost, very simple and bankable power plants, and then modularize them, scale them up in a way that is very simple and efficient. For example, this 50 megawatt power plant that will satisfy 600,000 new homes, by the time you put the shovel to the ground to when you turn the switch on, we're only talking about 12 months. So really, it's a game changer.
It just makes me wonder. I mean, you make it sound, I know it takes a while for the project to, come to fruition and all of that. And, obviously the benefits are actually remarkable. So one just wonders, why don't we have several of this being replicated monthly, every year at least, on the African continent?
Historically, the cost of renewables has been very high. In fact, just 5 years ago, it would have cost 6-7 times more to build some of these renewable projects than it is today. But as the drop in solar equipment has continued, more and more projects are now financially viable. At the same time, the financing tools that were not available just 12 or 18 months ago are now coming together. So it is really a perfect storm of technology, of financing tools, and of commercial know-how that are coming together in a crescendo to make these projects now perfectly viable.
And I know that, yes, they're viable and we're seeing an influx of investors into this space. But what about, how is the appeal for the much smaller countries, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, the likes of Liberia, Sierra Leone, Guinea, those countries that are in dire economic situations and obviously have a large population in rural areas, particularly off-grid? Is that an appeal? Would that kind of scenario, those kind of countries, appeal to investors? And how can such countries attract investors to come invest in that space?
Okay, well, you mentioned population, and I think it's a very good point. Access Power is based in Dubai, and by comparison, Dubai generates as much power as the country of Nigeria. So here you have a city of 2 million generating as much power as a country of 180 million people. And the vast gap that exists underlines the huge potential for growth, for investments that are in this sector. And this is why we are seeing more and more investor interest in big countries such as Nigeria first. But as the economies of scale take place, and as you have a nascent local market taking shape, you will see these service sectors branch out into neighboring countries and servicing and providing solar and clean energy solutions to these secondary markets as well.
Now, looking at the continent as a whole, all parts of the continent, are there regions that are advancing more than others in the area of renewable energy?
I don't think it's a regional thing. I think it's more of a country-by-country analysis. We have seen countries with strong governance, strong leadership really push ahead, because at the very core, the most important ingredient for investors is a sound framework and a sound policy for these projects to come about. This is why we're very, very excited by President Buhari's vision and his strong and positive views towards renewables. And I think this leadership is what's going to ensure that this country continues to blossom and continues to grow from a renewable energy perspective.
But do you see enough of that across the continent now? And are we moving, looking at the commitment of African leaders and the pace at which we're moving in the renewable energy direction?
It's like, is a glass half full or half empty? We like to look at it as half full. As I mentioned earlier, Access Power is currently investing in 17 different African countries. So clearly, we are very, very optimistic about the future. We think that as these economies continue to grow and as these renewable energies become more efficient and affordable, it's only logical that we will see the footprint of solar energy and of other renewable energies expand across the continent.
And I suppose Access Africa will probably want to, of course, expand beyond the 17 countries. What is your big picture?
I'll be very honest with you, 17 is already a lot because, as you can imagine, each of these countries has its unique climate, investment climate, unique challenges. And it is both a joy and a challenge to be able to develop and deploy this investment. But looking ahead, indeed, we are now expanding our staff, expanding on our office space with a full intention and commitment to expanding our investment in Africa's renewable energy sector.
Okay, now let's fast forward a bit, 10, 20, 25 years down the line, and looking at the pace in which Africa is moving towards renewable energy, what do you see the continent looking like in that time as we see more investments, not just from Access Africa, the strong interest all over the continent, more investments pouring in? Can we get to a stage where we look at the African continent and we would have solved perhaps more than half of our electricity needs?
Absolutely. I see that as being 100% viable. In some markets, we already see that renewable energy satisfies 50% of the consumption right now, today. And I think that with the leapfrog impact that we've seen across the telecommunication sector of Africa, that will also be adopted in the renewable energy sector. So the penetration of renewable energy for sources will take shape in Africa much faster than we have in some of the more mature markets. And indeed, within 20 years, you will see a very, very large presence of renewables, both at the utility scale, at the commercial scale, and indeed as a residential scale. As the technology improves, the cost continues to go down, and the adaptation becomes more widespread.
Okay, now, are there success stories you can point to, projects, perhaps projects that Access Africa has done that point to or demonstrate the value of investing or harnessing renewable energy in Africa?
One example is the Access Co-Development Facility. This was launched earlier this year as a platform to enable local developers to present their projects and form partnerships with an international investor, which is Access Power, and together bring these projects to life. And the fact that this facility was able to attract 55 different projects across 18 countries in its inaugural year is a perfect testament to the success that can be had between partnering international developers, investors, and local project champions. And I'm glad to say that we are extremely motivated and encouraged by the success of this inaugural launch. And in 2016, we'll be repeating this competition with the launch scheduled for February 18th, 2016.